first sign that something had changed did not come from a missile strike or a breaking military alert. It came quietly, moving through diplomatic backchannels between Islamabad, Tehran, and Washington. Somewhere behind closed doors, Iran reportedly made an offer to the United States, a proposal tied to the single most important waterway in global energy, the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow strip of water that most people never think about, yet one capable of shaking economies, triggering oil crises, and shifting the balance of global power within days. Iran's message was simple on the surface, but loaded underneath: reopen the Strait of Hormuz, reduce tensions, and begin moving toward ending the crisis. But there was a condition: nuclear negotiations would wait. And Washington did not immediately agree. At first, the story sounded like diplomacy finally breaking through months of escalation. After weeks of rising fear, disrupted shipping, and aggressive military positioning, a deal seemed possible. But what made this development so explosive was not simply that Iran wanted to reopen Hormuz. It was the timing. Because right now, the Strait of Hormuz is operating in a state experts describe as partially frozen. Shipping traffic remains dramatically below normal. In the last 24 hours, only 7 ships reportedly crossed through the strait, compared to roughly 140 vessels per day before tensions exploded. 7 ships through one of the world's busiest energy corridors. That number alone explains why governments are nervous and why markets are reacting to every single rumor. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another shipping route. It is the world's energy pressure valve. Nearly 20% of global oil supply passes through this narrow corridor between Iran and Oman. Tankers carrying crew from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE all depend on this passage to reach global markets. Every hour of disruption matters. Every delayed tanker changes calculations. When Hormuz slows down, the world feels it.
This
Fuel
is the
prices
Strait of
climb,
Hormuz.
shipping insurance rises.
Iran's
Governments start discussing emergency reserves, and financial markets become dangerously unstable. A narrow waterway suddenly controls headlines across continents. And right now, Hormuz is not truly open. That may be the biggest misunderstanding in this entire story. Officially, there have been announcements of reopening. Iran previously signaled that commercial vessels could pass during limited ceasefire windows. Yet real shipping data tells a completely different story. Traffic remains far below normal. Major shipping companies continue treating this corridor as a high-risk zone. The waterway exists in a strange in-between state, technically open in limited terms, but functionally restricted by fear, military pressure, and deep uncertainty. That uncertainty became the center of Iran's proposal. According to reports, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi used Pakistani intermediaries to deliver a plan aimed at reopening Hormuz while delaying the most politically toxic issue, nuclear negotiations. Tehran reportedly wants to separate the immediate crisis from the larger conflict. Solve the urgent problem now. Delay the impossible problem for later. On paper, it sounds reasonable, but geopolitics rarely works on paper. Washington is not simply evaluating whether ships can move again. Washington is evaluating what acceptance would mean. If the United States agrees to reopen Hormuz without securing larger commitments, it risks losing leverage built over years of sanctions, military pressure, and diplomatic positioning. American officials reportedly believe that reopening the strait without deeper guarantees could create a dangerous cycle. Temporary calm, then another escalation, then another negotiation forced by pressure. That fear explains why the White House has not rushed toward agreement. This is not a negotiation between partners trying to solve a shared problem. This is a standoff between two governments that fundamentally do not trust each other. Iran sees American pressure as coercion. The United States sees concessions without guarantees as weakness. Both sides believe they are negotiating from a position of strength. And that is exactly what makes compromise so difficult, because neither side wants to appear to blink first. The economic pressure, though, has become impossible to ignore. Oil markets are reacting aggressively to uncertainty. Brent crude recently climbed back above $100 per barrel after talks reportedly stalled. West Texas Intermediate also rose sharply as traders priced in prolonged disruption. Markets are no longer reacting only to confirmed events. They are reacting to fear. Fear that Hormuz may remain unstable, fear that diplomacy could collapse entirely. And markets fear uncertainty far more than bad news, because bad news can be priced. Uncertainty cannot. That is why every rumor coming from Islamabad, Tehran, or Washington now moves energy prices within hours. The ripple effects are spreading far beyond oil. Shipping companies are paying sharply higher insurance costs. Airlines are preparing for fuel volatility. Manufacturing industries that rely on stable transportation are adjusting their projections downward. Even products completely unrelated to oil are becoming more expensive because transport costs affect everything. One report suggested that logistics disruptions tied to Hormuz are already impacting supply chains far beyond the Middle East. This is how a narrow waterway quietly reaches into ordinary life. Most people will never see the Strait of Hormuz, but they may feel its impact at fuel stations, in grocery prices, airline tickets, and delayed deliveries. Iran understands this better than almost anyone. Few countries possess a geographic position capable of influencing global trade at this scale. Iran sits along one side of the strait, and that location gives Tehran a form of leverage unlike nearly any other nation on Earth. Geography becomes power. A narrow route becomes a negotiation tool. So Iran's proposal carries two messages simultaneously. The first sounds cooperative. Iran is signaling willingness to reduce tension. The second is harder to ignore. Iran is reminding the world that normal shipping depends on Iranian participation. That distinction changes everything. Because reopening Hormuz is not just a technical decision, it requires political trust. And trust right now is in short supply. Military presence in the region only deepens the tension. Naval patrols remain active. Surveillance is constant. Every movement is monitored. Commercial ship captains entering nearby waters understand they are operating inside a live geopolitical conflict, not simply crossing an ocean route. One wrong calculation could escalate quickly. A misunderstanding between vessels, a warning misread, a military maneuver interpreted incorrectly. That is how larger conflicts often begin. Not through deliberate action, but through confusion. And Hormuz has always been dangerously vulnerable to confusion. For decades, it has existed as one of the most sensitive flashpoints on Earth. Every time tensions rise between Iran and Western powers, Hormuz becomes the center of global attention because the world understands one simple truth. If Hormuz stops, the world pays. Reports suggest Pakistani mediation remains quietly active behind the scenes. Islamabad has emerged as a careful diplomatic bridge between both sides. Neither Iran nor the United States wants to appear politically vulnerable by engaging too directly or too openly. So much of this crisis is happening in silence. Publicly, governments release carefully worded statements. Privately, messages continue moving, exploring options, testing limits, searching for a framework that allows both sides to claim they did not lose, and all while ships wait. That waiting may actually be the most consequential part of this story, because every day without resolution changes long-term behavior. Shipping firms reroute cargo, energy buyers seek alternatives, supply chains adjust. The longer uncertainty continues, the more permanent these adjustments become. That creates real economic pressure on both sides. Iran cannot indefinitely sustain disrupted exports without serious domestic pain. The United States cannot ignore growing global economic instability forever. Eventually, pressure forces movement. The question is simply who moves first, and that question defines the entire current moment. Iran has placed an offer on the table. Washington has hesitated. The strait remains partially frozen. Markets remain nervous. Diplomats continue talking. Military forces stay positioned. But beneath all of it sits the central reality that neither side can avoid. This is not simply about reopening a shipping lane. It is about control, who controls the timeline, who controls the conditions of peace, and who gets to define what compromise actually looks like. Hormuz represents something much larger than one negotiation. It represents the fragile line between pressure and concession, between diplomacy and escalation, between cooperation and confrontation. Right now, the world is watching this unfold in slow motion. Not in public speeches or dramatic ceremonies, but in quiet messages exchanged through intermediaries, each side carefully testing the other, each side calculating risk, each side waiting for the other to show weakness first. And every hour that passes keeps the world suspended between possibility and a much darker outcome. The Strait of Hormuz sits there, narrow and silent. Ships move cautiously through it. Markets remain on edge. And somewhere behind closed doors, the next decision is already being made.